Imagine a world where the edge of the map simply says, "Here be monsters." It is the year 1000 AD. There are no GPS satellites, no steel hulls, and no guarantee of return. Deep in the North Atlantic, a single wooden ship, held together by iron rivets and courage, crests a wave that no European has ever seen before. History books often tell us that the story of America began in 1492 with a man from Genoa. But that story is missing its first chapter. Today, we aren't looking at Spanish galleons, we're looking at the clinker-built longships of the North. We're looking for the ghosts of the Norsemen who stood on the shores of a new world 5 centuries before Columbus was even born. Welcome to ChronoVault. We don't just tell history, we exhume it. We look at the evidence that was left behind in the dirt and the DNA to find the truth hidden beneath the legends. If you're ready to unlock the secrets of our past, step inside. You're watching The Vinland Secret. The Outcasts' Legacy. To understand why the Vikings ended up in Canada, we have to understand the man who led them there. Leif Erikson wasn't just an explorer, he was a man living in the shadow of a giant. His father, Erik the Red, was a man of such violent temper that he was kicked out of Norway, and then kicked out of Iceland. Erik ended up founding a colony in Greenland, a harsh, icy rock that pushed the limits of human survival. But Leif was different. He was a thinker. He had heard the frantic tales of a merchant named Bjarni, who had been blown off course years earlier and glimpsed a land to the west that was covered in deep, green forests. In a world where wood was more precious than gold, a land of trees was a land of power. Leif didn't just stumble onto America. He planned it. He bought Bjarni's old ship, the very one that had seen the land, and gathered a crew of 35 men. They weren't just warriors, they were carpenters, smiths, and farmers. They were a civilization in miniature, sailing into a void that the rest of the world didn't even know existed. The voyage into the unknown. The journey was a brutal test of the human spirit. These men and women lived in an open boat. They slept in leather bags, ate dried fish, and drank ale while the freezing spray of the Labrador Sea soaked them to the bone. First, they hit a land of flat stones, Helluland. It was desolate and icy. Then, they found the forests, Markland. But Leif kept pushing south. He was looking for something specific, a place where the grass stayed green and the rivers teemed with salmon larger than any they had seen in the north. Eventually, they found a curved bay on the northern tip of Newfoundland. They called it Vinland. When they landed, the Sagas say the dew on the grass tasted like honey. For the first time in human history, the circle was closed. Humanity, which had migrated out of Africa and split into 2 directions, one east through Asia and one west through Europe, had finally met on the other side of the planet. The smoking gun, Lance aux Meadows. For nearly 1,000 years, this story was treated like a fairy tale. That changed in 1960. A Norwegian explorer named Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Stein Ingstad, began searching the coast of North America using the ancient sagas as their map. In a small fishing village called Lance aux Meadows, they found what looked like old Indian mounds. But when they started to dig, the earth began to speak. They didn't find stone tools, they found iron. This is the smoking gun of the Viking presence. The indigenous people of this region at the time did not smelt iron. But here, in a small hut, the Ingstads found a smithy. They found bog iron slag, the waste product of a Viking blacksmith. Then came the ring-headed pin. It's a small, bronze object used to fasten a cloak. It's not a weapon of war, it's a piece of everyday fashion, identical to those found in Viking-age Dublin. Even more haunting was the discovery of a spindle whorl. This small stone tool was used for spinning wool. In Norse culture, this was strictly women's work. This tells us that Lance aux Meadows wasn't a temporary camp for soldiers. It was a home. There were families here. There was a plan to stay. The first contact and the Great Retreat. But the dream of Vinland didn't last. The Norse weren't alone in this new world. They encountered the Skraelings, their word for the indigenous people, likely the ancestors of the Beothuk or the Dorset. At first, they traded. The sagas tell of the Norse trading red cloth for furs. but the peace was fragile. One story tells of a bull escaping from the Viking camp. The bellowing animal terrified the locals, who had never seen such a beast. Panic led to conflict. Despite their iron weapons and shields, the Vikings were vastly outnumbered. They were 2,000 miles away from any hope of reinforcements. By the year 1020, the fires in the Longhouses at Meadows were extinguished. They packed their tools, boarded their ships, and turned back toward the east. They left behind a few discarded nails, a dropped pin, and a legend that would simmer in the minds of sailors for the next 5 centuries. The echo in history. Why does this matter? It matters because it proves that the human spirit is far more restless and capable than we often give it credit for. The Vikings didn't have the backing of a queen or the navigation tools of the Renaissance. They had wood, wind, and an unshakable will. Meadows is the only confirmed Norse site in North America, but recent satellite imagery suggests there may be more hidden along the coast of New Brunswick and Maine. The vault isn't empty yet. We are still finding pieces of the puzzle that show the Vikings were just the first in a long line of people who looked at the horizon and refused to turn back. The vault is closed for today, but the story of our world is still being written, or rather, unburied. If this journey to Vinland gave you a new perspective on our history, make sure to hit that like button. It helps us keep the lights on here in the vault. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the archives of the past. I'm your host, and this has been ChronoVault. Until next time, keep searching for the truth.